We're really excited to have Brian Kwan joining us here. He's got an amazing story. Welcome, Brian. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So, for those who don't know you, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I actually live in San Diego, sunny San Diego. I came here for residency, joined on as faculty, and really haven't left because even though I grew up in LA, it's one of those situations where I liked being close to my parents, but not too close, like not every weekend close. So why I chose San Diego, that was one of the reasons. The other thing, the more I go back to LA, the congestion, the traffic, it just gets me a little bit, a little bit more. But I still love LA, but San Diego is definitely now my home. So what I do in terms of kind of my day job is I'm an academic hospitalist at the VA hospital. I also have an academic appointment at UCSD, and really my focus has been around medical education, particularly with students and going into internal medicine. So I'm the co-clerkship director at UCSD. I'm definitely passionate about my job. I definitely do a lot of things, wear a lot of hats. I think that's kind of the academic life, but that's kind of my day to day in terms of what I'm about.
So how did you get into real estate?
So in terms of real estate, it's actually interesting because I've always been very good about my money. My parents, the way they raised me, were more like savers. So if we're kind of thinking about kind of the rich dad, poor dad, it's more of like getting a stable job and making sure you save a certain amount and then you put it in the bank and then it builds interest. Or so even from very little, I had kind of these financial principles that were kind of ingrained in me. And I really, in terms of my investing journey, I've been invested mainly in the stock market ever since college. And every time I would save something, I would kind of put it away. Even during residency, I contribute to a Roth. So I was doing a lot of kind of the good things. And one of the things that kind of well, there are a couple things I think that kind of changed in terms of my outlook on things. And one thing was kind of just in terms of the event that happened in my life. And during, I think it was basically 2017, one of the life-changing events for me was I unfortunately underwent a divorce. And as you know, as a divorce is a very not only emotionally, physically taxing situation, but it's a huge blow to kind of your financial state, especially when it's kind of a lot of times it's you don't anticipate it. You don't anticipate these things coming. And after just as I was kind of reeling from the divorce, I was thinking about just like, oh my gosh, because what happens is like California being a community property state, is that half of what you have essentially kind of is divided between each of the parties. And so I kind of felt like I was like hitting a huge reset button after having done a lot of kind of the live like a resident principles. Like I was driving and I actually drove my Camry that was I think a 1999 Toyota Camry. I drove it all the way until like 2018,
Wow.
basically till the end of its life. I was renting, and I had been renting until this year from an apartment. And I think part of it was that I've been living these principles, and then it just felt kind of almost unfair that like all of a sudden I kind of had to hit a reset button. So that was like one of the things that I think in terms of kind of the driving factors where I had to kind of look at, hey, this is my financial situation. Maybe I need to do something different other than kind of doing what everybody else was doing, which is like, putting into your 401, maxing out your 401, or our TSP is the thrift savings plan for a government. And then, and just kind of hoping that, at the end of the day, when you're retired, that you'll have enough and you'll just draw down from, kind of that resource. So that's one of the other things. And sorry, I mentioned the two things. The second thing is that I actually work as a hospitalist at the VA. And so part of it is that when you work as a hospitalist at the VA, in the VA or an academic setting, most of the times you are taking a little bit of a hit in your salary because you believe in the mission, right? So I believe in the mission that the United States has in terms of for veterans, and that's one of my areas of passion. And the other thing is, I do also believe that education is extremely important in terms of building the pipeline and the workforce. But as a result of choosing that mission, you do have to sacrifice your pay. And even it's interesting when just a couple of years ago, when one of the chief residents was graduating and they just moved to the academic center across the street, they immediately made almost 75K more than I did. And I had been working for at least 5 years in the VA system. And that kind of disparity in terms of what I make versus what people make as hospitalists in the community is very common. And that divide actually grows as you move out from kind of your start date. So those two factors were things where I had to really think about, and really consider in terms of kind of, I like insurance. I like kind of playing defense, and I like thinking about like how where am I going to be in 30 years, right? And so when I was thinking about that, I started listening to podcasts and also kind of reading a lot of books about. So I obviously read Rich Dad Poor Dad, right? And I think that's one of the books that really pointed to the idea of buying assets. And I love that idea, like, buying something that will grow, as opposed to like just putting your money and hoping that it'll come back and, have good returns. That's one thing, but actually like owning something and actually like feeling it. And I think that's why active real estate really kind of appeals to me, is like, I actually have that property somewhere else. I can actually move there, like touch it. And, this is something that I own, as opposed to most of the other ways that I was investing, which is like you're investing in this giant fund of money that other people control, and who knows what kind of motivations they have, or you don't have any control of that. So I think that really kind of spurred me in terms of when I was thinking about it, because I looked into like lending club, I looked into other types of syndications, accredited investor type of funds, and all those things are good and they all have a purpose and a place. But part of it was understanding what resonated with me. And I just kind of introduced a little bit of kind of that surface level about who I am as a person in terms of being an academic hospitalist. But what I really do, so like, yes, I take care of patients. I'm paid to take care of patients 90% of the time, so 90% clinical. But on top of that, I do a lot of other things, not because I get paid for it, but because I really enjoy and I am passionate about those things. And so one of the things I told you I was passionate about was education. So as a clerkship director, that's great in terms of my administrative responsibilities. And we're currently fighting to get a little bit more support. We actually, when I started, the clerkship director position had zero support actually for that position. And it's a full-time job essentially, because you're dealing with students throughout the year. You deal with all the grading, administrative stuff that comes along with scheduling, putting innovations in. That's not to mention any research or anything else that you're doing. And so that's like, kind of one of the hats that I wear for the VA perspective. I've been involved with kind of a hospitalist like body that basically advises central office on issues related to acute care. And so I've been a part of this group for a couple of years, and I recently got appointed to kind of a regional role within that spans basically the southern United States to the Southwest. So it includes like Long Beach, LA, it includes Albuquerque, all the way out to Albuquerque, and also the Phoenix regions. So that's something that I also do kind of on the side. And then on top of that, like, I'm involved with a couple professional organizations. So, the Society of Hospital Medicine is my home, my professional home. And so I've been chairing a committee for the last 3 years. I just recently stepped down from that role for physicians in training. And then on top of that, I just do research on the side. So it's kind of like all these things are kind of layered on top of each other. But that I provide a window into why real estate and active real estate management, is kind of appealing to me, right? Because I like doing these things, because I love to be active. I love to be engaged. I love to kind of invest in things that I feel will have a tangible product. And real estate was one of the things where I felt like I was finally doing it for me, right? Because a lot of the other things, it's for the goal, the vision of educating the future, right? Or helping our veterans, right? That missional statement, there's a lot to be said for that. But real estate was something like, well, if I'm willing to put all this time to do things for other people, it's probably good to also think about my own family. And, like when I do have a family, God willing, that I have something that I can do to provide for them. Sorry, that answer was a little long-winded, but I hope that understands in terms of why I started heading in the direction of real estate investing.
Yeah, amazing. And so where did your journey go from there? Once you kind of had that interest, what did you do next?
Yeah, so I was listening to this podcast, and it wasn't the Bigger Pockets podcast. Actually, my wife introduced that to me, but it was this one called Invest Like a Boss. And what they do is they review different types of investment strategies, right? And I remember that like a physician came on one of their podcasts and was talking about turnkey rentals, and I'm like, okay, that's cool, whatever. And then another podcast came on which talked about Memphis, it's a company that basically does turnkey rentals. I'm like, this real estate theme is starting to come up, and I started to think about it and how that resonated. And then I started buying some books that kind of, and one of the books I really love is The Real Estate Investor Millionaire by Gary Keller, and that really like set me over the top. And I was like, oh my goodness, like it's not just about the return, but what if my tenants could pay down my mortgage, and what if I could get like cash on top of that? And wait, hold on, there's like tax benefits that actually could bring even more cash into my pocket. And then the property itself, it's like appreciating. Like it's like so many, like when I think about that, as opposed to just like putting money in and getting a fixed return, right? Like there's just so much, it was so tantalizing to me, and I was like, oh man, I got to buy a property. And I started like looking, and I was like, I'm going to go on these like turnkey sites. And I started like looking, and I was like, well, I don't know if I should do this. And then Zero to Freedom came along right at that moment. It's kind of crazy because I had a goal already, right? I'm going to buy a property, in 6 months. And then Zero to Freedom comes along and says, oh, hey, we're starting this course that's, catering to physicians on how to buy it. And I was like, man, I need something like that. And I've never been hesitant to do that. And that's one of my learning points, as I think we'll kind of go through this, is that idea of investing in yourself, right? We always talk about investing in business, kind of putting the money back in the business so that it can grow. But you are the ultimate asset, right? And I see so many people who get hung up about like, oh shoot, like I'm gonna pay money, like I have to pay $200 to take a course. It's like, but what are you getting out of it? Like what kind of things, could it be? Like what dreams could you actually achieve if you went through that process of, actually paying that small, relatively small, but in your mind you make it into a big sum of money and getting to your ultimate goal. So that's when I enrolled in Zero to Freedom. So that's how I got in. Yeah.
I just gotta say, I love your passion for real estate. It is
I
so
do. I love it.
exciting. You
Yeah.
got me all like rah rah over here too. Like, we love this stuff, and it is really exciting to think about all the ways you get returns, and then also once you have your property to see that money rolling in every month. So
Yeah.
tell us about how you took action.
Yeah. So I think part of it is my learning style is a little bit different. Like I like to process, and I like to kind of go through all the steps and then just create kind of an action plan where I have discrete tasks. So if you look at my desktop, you might get a little bit freaked out, but I have like a short-term goal list, I have a medium-term goal list, and I have a long-term goal list. And then I have it for like different categories, like professionally or wedding planning, which I'm doing. Like these are the things that need to do, or even like, because right now we just bought a house and we're doing some renovations. Like I have like a to-do list on that as well. So that's kind of how I approach this, because I think with the course, there is definitely different types of learners. And that's just like understanding, just from where I'm coming from education. I see people who just immediately just start jumping, and they start like doing things like that week and start asking questions. And for me, I was just like, let me go through the course first. And then let me think about specific ways in how I can like use what I already have to kind of, use that base and then go from there. And when I say use what I have, one of the first things the course asks you is like, hey, what market do you want to get? want to be in, right? And so for me, I was thinking about it, and what it came down to is that I had already been networking even before Zero to Freedom, because I had been on Bigger Pockets and I had gone to some meetups, and it just happened so that like the people that I met in San Diego, a couple of them just happened to be investing in Kansas City, and I was like, wait a second, like, what if I could just use their networks, right? What if I can use like my relationships that I built with these people in order to already start being successful over there? Because one of my strengths, and I know this just in terms of kind of over my professional career, is I build relationships, with all those organizations I was talking about, the SHM, the VA, now I have literally friends in every city, in almost every institution, where it's like, hey, if I need something from that institution, I know somebody that works there and someone that I can trust to kind of do it. I saw the same thing in terms of building real estate, right? When you choose a market, why would you ignore the advantage that is already there, the relationships that already exist, and just try to set something up new? I mean, I could do it, sure, right? Like, it's not hard, but at the same time, why would I like, kind of look a gift horse in the mouth? Or is that what you say? Like, I don't know. But anyway, something like that. But you know what I'm saying. But so that's how I decided on like kind of going to Kansas City. And I started going through the list, and I liked how the course really kind of set, because I knew all these things in principle, like how to like build your team, right? Who should be on your team. But once you actually kind of start setting it up, you have to kind of, having some structure was actually helpful for me. Like, who do you want to be your lender, right? And should that lender be, someone who's in state or out of state, or like, and those considerations, and kind of going down that list with different people. How am I going to find a real estate agent? How are I going to build networks? And how am I going to not make this awkward because I don't know anything about real estate, and maybe they won't even talk to me, right? Like, and you create all these things. But so I kind of created a step list. So I got pre-approved. I started reaching out to already my network that was in Kansas City, and starting to kind of feel out what was going on. And now we go to one of the first challenges that I encountered just as I was taking action. What I found out quickly in Kansas City is there's a lot of real estate agents that only want you to work with them exclusively, right? And they don't tell you straight up, like, in the first couple of meetings, but, you'll be on the phone with them. They'll sell you a lot of good things. And all of a sudden they're like, oh, shoot, you're talking to other people? I don't want to talk to you anymore. And it was just kind of like one of those things where it's like, oh, that's an interesting, like, kind of dilemma. And I got into the situation where it's like, there were two real estate agents who are like, who I was working with at the same time. And, one of them brought me a deal, so I went with them. And then the other one just got really, really upset about the fact that I had like personally injured him because I hadn't like gone with them for this deal that the other agent brought me. And I just saw a lot of kind of the dynamics of how people work. And it honestly isn't that different from professional life, right? And just in terms of kind of how people interact. And you just have to, I think one of the things about real estate is you learn how to navigate those relationships. And ultimately at the end of the day, you want to treat people well, you want to bring value to people, and you want people to bring value to you, kind of do as unto others as they would do to you. But learning how to manage those relationships was one of the first, I think, barriers or obstacles that I encountered as I was taking action, just in kind of navigating that. So
love that. Yeah. I mean, and we wanted to, one of the things we want to do in this conference is really draw out some of those kind of challenges. And I love that one. And that's one that comes up often in the courses that we do. And, for us, we've always had success working with multiple agents. But yeah, you do run into certain situations where agents really don't like that. And so and like you said, you have to learn how to navigate that.
And I think one of the really important learning points is the agent that brought you the deal is the agent that you purchased the property with, because we've also seen people get in trouble if one agent brings them a deal and then they take it to another agent. And that's just a real taboo in the kind of in the community. So
yeah, and I think one other thing I want to point out was that, yeah, like you said, we can kind of teach you these things, but until you're kind of in the arena dealing with this personally, feeling those feelings of like betrayal or frustration on the part of an agent, right? That you didn't bring the deal to. So until you start feeling that, I think that's when it becomes real. And so yeah, I love that you kind of brought up the distinction of kind of being in the arena versus just book learning. Awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is that you guys are thinking about it. You teach us how to build that deal funnel, right? Like just like different agents. But in reality, sometimes it doesn't, like different markets kind of tick differently and just in terms of how they do it. And I've kind of settled on this fact of if I have like, there's gonna be different roles of different people, right? And the people that you work with, I think that's more important in terms of their character and their integrity. Because even though like the agent that I have purchased a couple of deals with, he basically has an exclusivity contract, but for him he's like, I'm never going to enforce that. Like if you bring another deal from someone else and and I'd be happy to go look at it, the only thing I ask is that you pay a little bit for my time in terms of being willing to go somewhere. And I'm like, absolutely, right? Because it's like that makes sense. I think a lot of times where investors go wrong is they start like asking for all these things, but a lot of agents, they're like, how do I know if this investor is serious or if they're ready to like buy a property, right? And so just kind of putting yourselves in the shoes of the business and like where they're coming from too is really important in terms of kind of building ultimately lasting relationships such that they'll look out for you. You'll pop to their list and they'll always kind of keep you in the loop, right? Like it's the same as any other professional kind of engagement, right?
yeah, relationships are definitely the key, and people are going to hear that in a lot of these interviews, I know for sure.
Well, but I wanted to kind of bring up one other thing is that, creativity is another one. And when you were just saying that, I know this is not meant to be like a problem solving or coming up with new ideas. But one idea that I just have is like, you pay a retainer to a lawyer, right? That's very common. And so, there's a possibility of providing a retainer to an agent and saying, okay, if we end up buying a deal, like if then can you pay me back that retainer? But in the meantime, you'll have this retainer, and if we never buy anything, then that can be yours after a certain amount of time. Like that is one way in which you could potentially build that trust. Again, I'm just throwing that out there, but when you were saying all this, it just kind of reminded me, like it just gave me that idea that, hey, this is a possibility here. And this is kind of like when one of the other things that we always talk about is kind of like coming up with those solutions. How can I kind of make this right, and how can I make sure that this agent doesn't feel like I'm wasting their time? So
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up something like that because actually on the personal home that we just bought, which we got actually a credit for a chimney, like basically they had these prefab chimneys that apparently are really the worst chimneys. I forgot what the name of the chimney is, but essentially there was a crack like down the chimney and eventually it becomes irreparable. And then when you replace the chimney, each chimney costs about 50 grand to replace. And we have two of those chimneys, right? So we were doing our inspection on our house, and that was like one of the big ticket items. So I was calling chimney people, contractors, and trying to find one that would come in to give me a bid and a quote so that we could use it to ask for a credit. And so, the chimney guy, he's like, what usually happens is that people will ask me to come by for a quote, but they never use my services. And I'm also doing this on kind of like a weekend and like at a rapid notice. And so, that's why I charge like $500 for this to happen. However, if you use my services in the future, then I will come back and credit you what you've been given. And that's exactly what happened. We used his bid to get a credit for the chimney. And then he came back to do the actual repairs. And then we basically credited back. So what you're kind of telling me is a little bit similar, except in the real estate world. It's like kind of that same principle of like a retainer almost. And then if I didn't use it, then he would get to keep it, right? So
yeah, love it. So then what ended up happening? So it sounded like you bought a couple properties with that one agent.
I did. Well, so the first property that I bought was right at the start of COVID. And so we were looking around, it popped up on MLS. So it's an MLS deal. I think it was listed for 170K, and it's in a county called Johnson County, on the Kansas side of Kansas City. And Johnson County, just to kind of give some history, is a rapidly appreciating, like, county. So everything is going up really, really fast. Real estate agents are super high on it. So it was a duplex amidst a bunch of single family homes. So and so I think that it was just kind of one of those deals where, okay, well, we're gonna have to make, a strong bid for it. So I ended up bidding about 15K over, or a little less than that, over the list price, in order to try to secure the deal. And so that was kind of our opening salvo. And then I heard back from our agent that, just in terms of going back and forth, that they wanted us to waive the appraisal contingency. So I think they were worried, obviously, that the property wasn't going to appraise. So for people who aren't kind of in the real estate field, basically one of the things during the process of, kind of escrow or due diligence, is you have someone come in and they actually assess the value of your property. And what they do is they look at the value of similar properties around yours, and they try to kind of match it up, what we call comps, or comparable kind of market prices of homes that recently sold. And they try to kind of basically ballpark that into kind of a range. And in this market, as most people know, people are offering 200K over or 500K over. So a lot of times that appraisal contingency, if you're buying a typical home, does get waived, because people are just bidding what is way over what previously similar properties have sold. So in terms of this, so this is my first like encounter with anything. With in terms of kind of putting my first offer in. And so I was like, oh, well, that's good. I mean, it means that I'm actually in the game for like actually going with this. So we ended up waiving the appraisal contingency to a point, but we set that point to about 10K below. And at that point, we would kind of renegotiate. So unfortunately, the property did appraise, but that by doing that, it actually allowed me to secure and actually lock up the deal. So that was kind of the first foray into this deal. So
Nice.
I was super excited about it. It's a duplex, again, amidst a bunch of single family homes in Lenexa, which is on the west side of Kansas City.
And did you find that deal yourself, or did your agent find it for you?
I did. I found it myself, actually. It popped onto MLS. So when I linked up with my agent, basically, he kind of set me up onto the search, and I saw it, and I the next day basically contacted him. And what I really like about my agent is he's super responsive, and he like goes out to the property as soon as I give him a call. He's like, hey, I'll go check it out, and then he'll give me kind of a rundown. And he actually this is interesting because he's not just my agent, but he's actually my contractor as well. So
Mm.
he has kind of a dual agency role, which, I think a lot of times you have to be a little bit careful and skeptical about. But one of the things is that we were actually looking at a property before this, and what he did, some other company had tried to kind of sell it to me in terms of like, oh, this is a wonderful property. And he had actually just happened to be on site because he was looking at it for other investors. And he's like, the quality of their work is really shoddy. And I really like that. I like when someone comes in and says, that work sucks, because I'd rather have somebody who has standards and who's going to apply those standards to when they're doing work, as opposed to someone's like, oh, it's all good, like it'll just hold up, it looks fine. So I like that he had those standards, and that was one of the first steps in terms of towards me trusting in his work.
And did that property require work then, that you ended up doing a rehab on it?
Yeah. So this property, we went back and forth, and we did the inspection, and I think there was a lot of the property itself was in the 1970s in terms of this duplex. And so there was a bunch of electrical work, and there's a bunch of the roof needed to be replaced. So we decided to essentially ask them just for credit for the roof replacement. And I think the sewer, there was, a couple of things that also needed to be cleaned out. So we asked them for credits for both the roof replacement as well as the sewer. And unfortunately, because we didn't, again, we didn't have a laundry list of things for them to replace. They granted that to us because we had a sense that the real estate agent, just really wanted to get the property kind of out of sight. But that's what they agreed on, and that was where we came to. So we ended up getting the roof replaced, obviously after close. So that was one of the first kind of renovations that we put in on it. But actually, it needed actually a lot of little things, which I think we'll see in some of the pictures later. But we had to basically do a full gut rehab of the kitchen, as well as the bathroom, and also some of the electrical system as well. So one of the electrical panels was behind where the washer dryer kind of a stack was going to be, which is obviously a place where you just can't have it. So we actually had to repurpose that into a different area, and we had to do a lot of other minor kind of electrical changes, which is something we anticipated, but did bring the rehab cost up a little bit. But it's much more functional now, and it's much more safe, which I think in the long term is going to be great.
So you mentioned this happened during COVID. So
Yeah.
is this a property you actually went to see? Did you do all this? And how did COVID affect you?
Yeah. So I have to say that, maybe I was getting a little bit nervous during this time, because the property, we closed on it basically the end of February, beginning of March. So right kind of when things were like in the middle of starting to shut down. And so I was a little bit nervous, but at the same time, I think that what real estate has really changed over the years, and you can see so much and you can know so much even without being there. So I guess as background, I haven't been to Kansas City other than to the airport. And I still haven't seen either of my properties in Kansas City yet, just because I've been very careful about traveling. I actually just went on my first trip since COVID, about a week ago. That was the first time that I've gone on an airplane. And so, with things like Redfin and Zillow, you're able to really see Google Maps. You can actually see your property and really understand it. And it's so funny because I feel like when I think about Kansas City, I feel like I know Kansas City. I'm like, dude, that's where all the good stuff is. The downtown area, there's a trolley that goes through, and there's like this barbecue place on that corner. And then on this side of this is like where all the businesses are kind of coming to. And on the bottom, like, because I'm a VA person, our electronic health records, Cerner is actually, they have a big site there. And that's appeared, a place of growth. So I feel like I know Kansas City, even though I've actually never been there. But I'm so excited because, I think in this coming year, I'll finally have a chance to visit and actually see these properties and see these, assets that I've acquired. And I think it'll just make it all the more sweeter. But during this whole time, during kind of the acquisition phase, during the renovation phase, and even now when it's stabilized, I actually haven't been onto the property site. I've only seen pictures of the before and after, and we've only kind of done basically conversations on phone to kind of like kind of nail down all the details that we need to do. So
Yeah.
So, but talk to me about trust, because
Yeah.
this is your money, and you haven't seen this place, and you're trusting them, right, with a lot of money, both in terms of the purchase, but also the renovation. So, can you talk to me about the level of trust that you have with them?
So, I mean, I think in general that, I do trust people, but I like to verify like things are happening. And I think one of my other learning points is that people really, that perfect is the enemy of good, right? So at some point, you have to start your journey, you have to take action, and you have to try, basically you do your research, you do your due diligence, but you actually have to kind of step out and say, well, what they're telling me, they answer the questions correctly. They said all the right things. It doesn't mean that they're actually going to do it, but I have to trust them to actually give them a chance to do what needs to be done. And if they're open to feedback, right? And so I think that that's another quality that I look for. Like they're looking for me, like, hey, how can we actually improve your experience? That kind of relationship is what I really value, because I think that at the end of the day, if you want to get the best real estate agent, the best contractor, and the best property manager, that's all well and good. But most of the times they're going to be so busy, they're not going to pick up your text. They're not going to pick up your phone calls. you actually have to build those things, right? So what I really liked about them is that they're not a big company, right? They manage about like 50 to 80 rentals in that kind of range. And so they're more of a small and hopefully will become kind of a medium size, and they're starting to build their business. But those are the people you look for, the people who are hungry, but still kind of have those nuggets of, like they have the knowledge, but they just haven't had the time yet to get there, right? So I think that's one of the things is you have to, there's a balance, right, in terms of like trusting, and you have to be willing that if it doesn't work out. And one of the team members that I've replaced a lot is the real estate agent, because a lot of times they may not understand. Like one of the real estate agents I talked to didn't understand that depreciation is a thing, right? Like in rental properties. And so like, and that one to me was a little bit of a red flag. I still gave him a chance to kind of like, talk it over. But after he wanted kind of an exclusivity contract, I said, I don't think we're the best fit, right? And so you have to be willing to replace members. But I think that for me, I tend to be on the side of giving people a large degree of, kind of a number of chances before kind of moving to another person.
So can you tell us about your second property?
Yeah, so with my second property, it's something that I actually didn't expect. But I was actually in our team page, and I saw that one of our team members had posted a property that was in Bonner Springs, which is a little bit northwest of where my current property was. And one of the reasons why is that it was one of kind of the areas that I was like looking at as potential, that if any properties came across my radar, and I was like, oh, this isn't a great price point. And so I immediately kind of went on to the different listing sites, and I couldn't see it on MLS. And I was like, that's kind of odd. And so then I looked at, other sites, and it wasn't on Redfin, but then it was only on like Zillow. And it turns out it was a for sale by owner, right? So that's how he put it on. And basically, he didn't put it through kind of the multiple listing service, which is the standard way where properties get, basically listed and then bid on. But he was just doing it through one website. And so I looked at the property, and it's interesting because I don't think I mentioned in the first with the first property, every time a good deal comes on, it happens when I'm on service. So when I'm on service, I'm working essentially 12-hour days for 14 days straight. And in the middle of that, like it just happens to be that's when the deals come online. And so I also wasn't expecting, honestly, I wasn't actively looking because I feel like if I actively look for deals, I'll start buying stuff. So it's kind of like, when I try not to look at coupons. I try not to I turn my slick deals off when I'm really trying not to look at stuff because I have a tendency, I'm like, oh, that's a good deal. I really want to buy it. But I was in the phase of kind of preparing for my future, which is this year, which was buying my personal property and also planning and paying for a wedding. And so anyways, I wasn't looking. I was like, oh man, that's such a good deal. I need to go into it. So I called Mark the next day, and I basically mobilized my team immediately, and I called two of my lenders, and I to make sure pre-approval, what's the rate. I called Mark. He went on site. We did a walkthrough kind of to take a look at it. And it turns out this owner was actually doing multiple duplexes on the same street. And so, and one of the other things is that this, the site of this property was close to another place of another student of Zero to Freedom. So I already knew kind of where the potential rent points were going to be. And so the current place was renting at about 600 per side, which is for a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, and the potential would be 900 to 1,000, right? Just in terms of that. So I already saw that there was already kind of that value that was at play. So I got Mark in the game. I got my lenders in the game. I emailed my insurance agent in terms of, I'm like, hey, this is a property I'm looking at. Can you just give me a quick quote? And started basically to churn the numbers. And Mark and I were like, well, let's talk about a strategy here, because he's offering actually multiple duplexes. So we actually put in an offer for 2, because that way we could actually ask for a discount and said, hey, if my buyer is going to take 2 of these, can you actually get a discount? It turns out he was trying to actually sell one of those duplexes to one of the current tenants, but as a result of us kind of making an offer on 2, he actually discounted the other
Nice.
so it's still, that strategy was something new that we employed. and try it out. So then we basically, that next day we locked it up real good. And that was my first experience for sale by owner experience. And that one's a little bit of an older property. It was 1960s. And so we ended up kind of discovering some things as we went along, including some foundational issues, which were hidden by the piles of trash and cat feces that were on the floor. But it was a really at the end of the day, I think it's a really great buy, and we've done a lot of good work to it and brought new tenants in. So kind of like moving ahead of the story, this happened in November of last year. So fresh in COVID, no vaccines yet, right? And so we discovered during our due diligence process that one of the tenants hadn't been paying. And so, and it hadn't just been for 1 month, but it had been for several months. And so that obviously offered an element of risk that was greater than just, because if you inherit a non-paying tenant during COVID, during the moratoriums, it would be pretty challenging. And so, so we kind of thought about how we were going to help this tenant, right? And so we talked to the owner and we talked amongst each other. And what we decided to do was we were going to ask the owner to, and the owner was really nice, by the way, but we asked the owner to give the tenant notice, and that would be a contingency for us for our closing on the deal. And on top of that, we actually discussed kind of incentives, because 600, even in that area, is a really low rent. So it's really hard to find kind of another place to go. So we ended up giving cash for keys as kind of an incentive. If they moved out earlier, we would be able to give them, basically, I think we gave them around like 500 or very close to their basically the rent price. And as a result, it was kind of a smooth transition where they moved out, and we immediately had one occupied place, and we had one where we could start rehab immediately. So that kind of worked out really nice.
Yeah. And let's just highlight what cash for keys is, because a lot of us actually end up using it, which is you pay somebody to leave early and earlier than their lease was running out. And that really, when you think about how much it's going to cost you to have a non-paying tenant in there for 4, 5, 6 months, it actually becomes, you potentially were willing to pay a fairly large chunk to get that tenant out early. And then they walk away with a chunk of cash that they can use to get into their next place. And so we have employed that ourselves in several instances. And I know a lot of other students have as well.
Well, I think it gets to also the problem solving, right? Is that when you encounter a problem, you came up with this cool solution, and it sounds like, you've been consulting with your agent quite a bit throughout these transactions, which is really cool. A really nice thought partner to help you come up with these ideas. And again, that's a great solution, I think, for getting somebody out, especially if they're not paying rent.
And another solution we've seen, and we've actually thought about using ourselves, is having money left in escrow by the seller for a tenant who's non-paying, so that they cover 6 months of that tenant potentially staying in the unit. So there's another solution.
Yeah, I love it.
We
I mean,
going about that one too. Yeah.
Ahead, no, I was gonna say, going back to the beginning of this second deal, one of the things that I heard you say was that you encountered this deal, you found this deal, and you immediately mobilized your team. And I just love that image, because I just kind of think about somebody who doesn't have that in place, right? That team in place that they trust, right? We're talking about trust. And also somebody who you can rely on to go by the place, somebody who can consult with to come up with a strategy. You hadn't dealt with for sale by owner. So it was like, hey, obviously you had to kind of navigate that. It was so cool that you had somebody, a Zero to Freedom student, who could verify rents on the same street or in the same neighborhood. Again, the difference between somebody who is trained, who's got the experience, who's got the team in place versus not, it's like mobilize the forces versus what do I do, right? So it's just a complete night and day difference. So I love that, you have that in place. And so, yeah, clearly, I think one of the keys to your success.
Yeah. And one of the things that I kind of wanted to highlight too was just the idea. I don't know if you guys have heard of this, but I actually learned about it from Bigger Pockets, but the idea of giftology. And so it's kind of like the idea of like when it's kind of the use of gifts in terms of showing like gratitude. And I think we do it a lot in our day to day. But it's kind of the idea which we were kind of hinting at earlier in terms of how do you reward your network and your team, and how do you build not only trust, but also like, good good vibes or good karma, but also like, but the idea that you want to show gratitude. And so I think that one of the things with this property is that it's a for sale by owner. So as a result of that, there isn't a fixed commission, right, that you have to pay, right? And my real estate agent was like, I will help you with this deal and I will do it for free because he's doing my contracting. So there's definitely some incentive for him to do it, right? It builds their portfolio, it gives them income in the long run. They want to see a lasting relationship. But at the end of the day, I was like, no, like you helped me with this deal, even though I know how to navigate the deal myself a little bit better, right? You're there, and the paperwork is definitely not as onerous as a kind of a normal transaction. But at the same time, I was like, no, I will pay you for your time. So I took basically like 3 or 4% of that commission, and I sent them a check, and I said, hey, that's great. And another way of kind of expressing it is that I was just like on a run, and I was like, man, I just want to show my gratitude. So one thing that I did this last week was that I actually asked one of the Kansas City people for a really good restaurant. And so basically and this restaurant didn't have any online like gift card stuff. So I had to call in and have them send like, kind of a custom gift card to them so that they could take a date night. Cause I know that basically they work really, really hard. And so I think one of the principles here is that when you bring value, there's different ways of doing that, and bringing gratitude and building trust. It goes both ways, right? Like just in terms of me as a person. And this isn't to like put me at the top of their deal list or anything like that. It's honestly, for me, it's to show gratitude because I've been able to do things out of state because they are there, right? Like that's like when you think about it, that's not something we can take for granted. It's something that it's their time, it's their effort, and they've done such a great job stewarding what I've kind of given them, that I'm like, dude, I just need to give more. So so it kind of is that abundance and generosity mindset. So
Amazing.
Yeah, that's absolutely
Yeah.
huge in the relationship building. But then, yeah, I mean, when you do well, your team members do well. And I love that, because that's exactly how we feel too. Like we could go find our own deals without agents. Kenji is a real estate agent. We could do that. But the truth is, they bring so much value that we're happy to pay them. And that's how we kind of approach it too with our people. So
Yeah,
beautiful.
for sure. Yeah, no, I think it's so great because, we also hear the opposite of people feeling, have these expectations, right? That the agent is, or whatever vendor is going to serve them. And, there's not this thought of giftology, like you're talking about, this gratitude, right? And so I think that that's really valuable. And for those, who may not be employing this, you really want to think about, how to build those relationships. This is how far I think, you really have to, really have to kind of think, and you really have to kind of, and exactly, I love what you said about the commissions. I mean, exactly what we do whenever somebody, does the work. It's like, of course we're going to pay you, right? I mean, it just, so anyway,
And
I
this
love
stuff
that.
comes back to you. It really,
Yeah.
truly
It
does.
really
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. And also, like, sorry, one other point is that you're doing it without strings attached, right? You're doing it
Yeah.
truly from a good place. And, I think that, whether you're expecting it or not, it's going to come back.
Exactly.
So amazing.
So where do you plan on going with your real estate portfolio in the future? I know you're a little bit on pause because you just got your primary residence, but where do you want to be in a year or 5 years from now?
Yeah, I mean, so I think part of this is, one of the biggest parts is getting my wife and I on the same page in terms of kind of our goals. And my wife got her real estate license last year, and is working at Redfin. And so she's working currently as an associate agent in terms of kind of, because that's just kind of fit into our lifestyle. An associate agent is essentially like a contractor that shows homes for Redfin. And so it's kind of like a per diem in a sense. And so part of it is we've been talking about the idea of like what real estate investing could do for our lives. And so one of the things that I never want to do is ever pressure my wife to do anything that she's stubborn and she will not anyways agree to it. But that being said, I want her to understand and to do the reading and to come to kind of her own place of like, is this the place that we want to go? And I've kind of showed her like the potential. And it's funny, she comes from a family who's invested in real estate. And so it's not like she doesn't have any of that background. So I'm hoping that, as we discuss it throughout the course of the end of the year, we'll come to a place where in 2022, that will be kind of a big acquisition year. And hopefully I can finally join the other coaches on the reps bandwagon. So so that would be kind of where I hope that we're headed. But again, that's again, I think relationships, especially personal ones, trump anything else. So I want to make sure that she's kind of on that same page before we kind of move there. But
Awesome. Yeah, it's so interesting. I've heard so many stories like that, like where, navigating that relationship and one person hoping the other could be reps, and
yeah,
maybe that person may not want to, and so it just
right.
it's that back and forth, the interplay is really interesting. So awesome.
So any closing advice for others who are maybe hearing about real estate for the first time, and are looking for, some insights?
Yeah, especially for the academics, right? Who probably have, just like you do, like so many, balls in the air they're juggling. So yeah, what advice would you have?
I think it comes down to the fact that multiple roads lead to freedom. And the reason I say that is because, just because I participate in real estate doesn't mean that I don't have, kind of money or assets in other places, right? So I still have a brokerage account. I still have a retirement account, although my strategy might change with that in terms of contribution. And I do, I invest in real estate notes. And so I have other areas which again kind of all head towards that common goal. And so I think that as there's multiple interviews and places where people go, your road doesn't have to be exactly like someone else's. It won't be like someone else's. You create your own path. You figure out what's your own style. Maybe real estate active investment isn't for you because you just don't like it, or it doesn't fit your style. But maybe it's more of passive investment, and that's okay. But ultimately, kind of thinking about it as a physician, again, money doesn't buy happiness, but money can certainly help quite a bit in terms of contributing to your goals and your wellness. And I think that's what I try to tout, even when I'm talking to any of my colleagues or any of my students about money, because that's something that previously was taboo. But it's like, thinking about what we are in terms of our worth is very important as we think about our burnout and our satisfaction with what we do. So that'd be my closing.
Thank you so much for Brian for joining us.
Of course. Thank you for having me.